Hello, and welcome to, well, the first of the World War II crackpot schemes or good ideas badly executed. And strange enough, in World War II, there are sort of less and more. I was considering adding Hobart's Funnies into this, and the Mulberry Harbour scheme, and various other things which Churchill really did get behind and push. And in the end, I decided that the trouble is, when you become Prime Minister, you have to both have more ideas and you have more conflict over who actually owns those ideas, because inevitably, especially once you're dead or no longer in office, people produce books where they take credit for all the good ideas and they lay the blame for all the bad ideas at your feet. And of course, the buck does stop with you. That's the job of being in charge. That's the problem. And it's kind of like Churchill and, I'm going to say a word which YouTube doesn't like, Hitler suffer from the same problem. In that, pick any particular hero you have from World War II. All their good things you will claim are down to them, and half the time you will say any problems they had were the fault of insert leader here. Now, here is the small problem. A lot of records from the Third Reich do not exist, so we don't know exactly how much Hitler really interfered into the day-to-day running of things, other than offered pointers or general incentives and people went off and tried to fulfill them. The difference is, though, with the World War II British documents and archives, a lot of that does survive. Not everything by a long shot, but enough survives that you certainly can get an idea over who did what, and over who was responsible for what, and over how much input various people had. For starters, Mountbatten deserves everything he's blamed for. Everything. And a lot more that he's not. A lot more that he's not. I'm not saying, though, that Mountbatten is necessarily a bad person. Honestly, you have a very limited pool of people you can draw from to take over certain positions. The often idea is that you can put anyone in any spot, and often the reality is, for most strategic commands, you're not looking for a good general admiral. You're looking for a good politician who can balance the competing allies. The whole point is you give them good operations people who will come up with their operational qualities. Your pre-war CNCs, they're different. They often had to be both. But your wartime CNCs, you need a lot more of them. And unfortunately, you're going to put your first rank ones where they can actually do their jobs. Now, interesting thing, Mountbatten and Vian are both flotilla commanders at the beginning of World War II. Destroyer flotillas commanders. Vian ends up World War II and very shortly afterwards becomes an admiral of the fleet. Goes up rapidly through the ranks. Never gets a theatre command. Is always being put in charge of fighting units and leading fighting units. And let's be honest, Philip Vian is not the world's best politician. He's a very good admiral, but he's not the world's best politician. You also have to remember the Royal Navy and other chunks of the armed forces lose a lot of senior officers in the 1939-1940 period. Some of them die through various natural causes, Henderson, etc. Some of them even get captured by the Germans, which is problematic. These are people you spend a lot of time, money, and effort training and putting in posts, which have hopefully equipped them with the skills you need for running senior roles, and you lost them. You think mislaying a battleship is a thing. Mislaying a general? Come on! They're self-propelled. Quite literally, just put a bacon sandwich in their mouths occasionally and they'll move around. Perhaps on the modern generals, a vegan sausage sandwich. But it doesn't matter. You basically give them food, they'll move themselves. And some just get overworked and end up having to be folded out the war because they just can't keep the pressure. We've talked about this with Somerville before. The fact that, honestly, in my opinion, the man needed a break. He doesn't get one. And that's half the trouble. Well, this is the reality of strategic command in World War II. So, the buck stops, therefore, with Winston Churchill, and he gets the blame for everything. But there is plenty of glory to go around. There is plenty of successes to go around. And the criteria for this are Churchill's initiatives. Good plans poorly executed. Or, were they good ideas and were they poorly executed? Well, the Altmark Incident. I have done many videos about the Altmark Incident in various points, including different perspectives on it. So if you want to go and have the full details of the Altmark Incident, please do. But why is the Altmark Incident coming up today? Why is it something I can say is a crackpot scheme or good ideas badly executed? Well, the point is, Churchill's trying to stop those prisoners getting back to Germany. He is pushing everything he can. But I would argue the Altmark Incident, more than anything, leads to the German invasion of Norway. And as I've said many times before, the German invasion of Norway is one of those critical points that literally adds years to the conflict. Because a German invasion of Norway means that you suddenly have access for them to the North Atlantic, to the Arctic convoys. It means that your anti-submarine warfare patrols are that much more difficult. Because, think about it, even a neutral Norway, there is a space which the Norwegians are responsible for, and the Germans shouldn't get through. And, of course, the British are planning on mining Norway, but then they hesitate. Well, this is the bad execution point of view, because if the British had gone to mine Norway a day or so earlier when they planned, they'd have actually been off the coast of Norway when the Germans arrived, and that could have been an interesting battle. All up and down the Norwegian coast, German ships coming going, "We're going to invade Norway!" Fudge! There's a whole British... Nice battle. I know, a bit of hyperbole, and I'm sure there'll be people who go, we don't like it. But that's what would happen. Because the British were planning on taking carriers, battleships, the whole fleet with them. Yes, the Germans had the two Scharnhorst, but if the two Scharnhorst, as we all know, they have a run-in with renown and decide they'd rather be anywhere else than dealing with an angry 15-inch battle cruiser, which is upset about them sinking one of her escorting destroyers. There are things they would prefer to be. And the fact they hadn't even been responsible for the sinking of that particular destroyer had been HIPAA, and therefore they shouldn't be held personally responsible, didn't seem to wash with renown as a viable argument. The Norway campaign. The British task force is humongous, what they're prepared to send. And the fleet there, the Royal Navy is prepared to send. The Royal Navy are sending Resolution, HMS Resolution, Rodney, Valiant, Warspite, Renown, Repulse. They have Ark Royal, Furious and Glorious there. They have Berwick, Devonshire, Effingham, Suffolk, York, Birmingham, Glasgow, Manchester, Sheffield, Southampton, Arethusa, Aurora, Enterprise, Galatea, Penelope, Cairo, Calcutta, Carlisle, Coventry, Kakoa, Curlew. They have destroyers there, a whole load of tribal ones: Afridi, Bedouin, Cossack, Eskimo, Gurkha, Punjabi, Zulu, Somali. There are far more there as well, and basically almost every single tribal destroyer ends up doing some time off Norway. They have other destroyers as well. They have sloops, they have submarines. They have a full force that turns up. And there are French naval vessels there as well, Polish naval vessels there. And there's, of course, the Norwegian ships. Honestly, this should not. If this force had been in place earlier, it would have been probably a very successful battle for the British. And then we have the fact that Churchill's put in, as the First Lord of the Admiralty, he has chosen a different admiral to command it. And then you have all the problems in the Norway campaign because of the admiral not getting on with the army. And honestly, Churchill chooses that admiral. Cork and Ori should never have been sent under any circumstances. He's terrible as an admiral at that point. I don't know what happens to him, but then a few months later, he's trying to pin cowardice on Somerville and all sorts of things. So, honestly, not sure. World War II seems to have degraded him down to a point at which he shouldn't have been anywhere near service. And that's Churchill's choice. So that's bad execution. It's a good idea to send the force to Norway. It's a bad put that officer in charge. There is all sorts of things which go wrong in the Norway operation, but it starts off with the Altmark Incident. Because the moment it happened, the British should have then issued a promise to Norway that if Germany takes any, because of our actions, if Germany takes any aggressive response to you as a result of this, if they do anything, you have our guarantee, a guarantee of security, and our guarantee. They should have made that a public statement. And they should have kept a force ready and available in Scotland to go. And they should have done that mining. Again, what were the Norwegians going to do? Lodge a nasty protest? The odds of them actually joining with Nazi Germany? Very low. They don't want to be with them. And honestly, they'd probably quite like the Brits turning up and putting the mines there because they protest about it. But it would make up for the fact that they hadn't invested in defence in the last 20 years. Or arguably the last 50 years at that point. So, the British minefield would kind of help them. So, Altmark was a good incident. British go in, they get their people back. Yay, that's very well planned, very well executed. The follow-up for Norway, very badly executed. You have the forces available. The British actually deploy the British and French combine, and Polish deploy about a dozen brigades very quickly to Norway after the Germans invade. And that's actually a lot more than the Germans initially get there. Yes, the Germans turn up with divisions, but it takes them a long time to get the whole divisions out there. They turn up with penny packets of troops, and they slowly reinforce them. It's just... they have options. The Altmark incident is a very well-run incident. But what happens afterwards in the managing of the relationship with Norway, in the managing of what happens in terms of Norway campaign, is just atrocious. It is. So this is one of those factors which leads to a lot more problems during World War II. And again, this is part of that execution. Because, again, Churchill's First Lord of the Admiralty, he's got to be thinking about a distant blockade. Because that's what Britain did in World War One. It's probably what they're planning in World War Two. It's the best way to protect our trade. It's the best way to keep the Germans contained. And it's going to be the cheapest on resources to manage. Especially if you're going to end up fighting the Italians as well, which the British are pretty sure is going to happen. They do not expect Mussolini to keep out the war forever. In fact, they're also watching Franco quite heavily. So with that all in mind, and that's your long-term aim and your long-term strategic outcome, which you're probably going to be dealing with, the whole dealing with Norway post the Altmark incident is absolutely atrocious. They need to be positively embraced. They need to be apologized to. You need to be making sure you have thorough intelligence going on there so you know what's going on. But you also need to make sure you have the forces ready to respond and you're taking a proactive engagement with the Norwegian forces. Everything you can do, you need to do. Because if anyone looking at a map goes, you know what, Norway doesn't matter to the control of the North Sea, they're just wrong and they're reading a map of the Pacific. And if you think about World War II logically, control of Norway, as I said earlier, would provide protection for the Arctic convoys. And it would provide protection for the whole North Atlantic. Because yes, even if France falls, you'll go, well, then the submarines can still operate out of France. Well, they can, but they have to get to France, which means they have to be taken across land, which is not exactly that great and easy, or they have to sort of get through whatever anti-submarine barrier Britain puts up between it and Norway at the end of the North Sea, and then round Britain, round the Atlantic to France, and then from there go to their operating areas, which they can do, but it's going to have an attrition effect. And they can't do the aircraft attacks and the air scouting, which Norway makes possible. In fact, if you stop the invasion of Norway, or manage to secure Norway so it's neutral for a war, you prevent the invasion of Iceland. The British no longer need to invade Iceland, because if Norway's protected, how are the Germans going to get to Iceland? And even if they do, that's not going to be exactly a tough operation for the British to starve and take over. And probably the Americans will come and do that for them. Certainly the Canadians will happily send a lot of troops to secure Iceland if the Germans get that close. And you've shortened the war. You also have secured Sweden. And you can have a good relationship with them. You can stop Sweden being used as a path for troops to attack Russia later on in the war, which is going to affect the outcome on the Eastern Front. You can also make sure that the Swedish iron ore can come to Britain. That's good. And depending on how you handle it and whether or not the Germans do actually attack Norway and you fight them off, you can probably base heavy bombers in Norway, which would be a very interesting experience, because if you have heavy bombers based in Norway, which can produce a lot of supplies probably to support those bombers, but also which will ease the logistics to supply them, but you can still supply them relatively easy from the UK, think of where all those bombers could reach in Germany. Again, the whole British command staff and a lot of British people should have been thinking about Norway in World War II, but they weren't. So this is one of those incidents where there is some good planning going on. There's the ideas for how to do things, but it's being terribly executed, and I'm sorry. it has to lie with Churchill, that one, because he's First Lord of the Admiralty and then he's Prime Minister. So, yeah, the buck stops with him. Mainly he's First Lord of the Admiralty at this point. But he's the one who's supposed to be advising the Prime Minister. So the Altmark Incident. It itself is well done. And he supports his naval officers tremendously. But afterwards, it's terrible. Anyway, thank you. Hope you enjoyed, and I'm fairly sure you can all guess what's going to be in the next one. Take care.